grade, stand up.
You're first, second, third, fourth, or fifth.
There you go.
Or first through fifth.
All right, now let me ask y'all stay standing. If you're in the 7th through 12th grade, stand up for a second. There's a lot of, now, listen to me, I want to tell you something. I was with a group of students just like you not too long ago, and we were rafting on the Ocoee River, and it's whitewater. And I had on a helmet, and I had my paddle, and there were 5 students in the raft with me. And we were at the very end of our rafting trip, and we were about to go over a waterfall. The waterfall was about this high. Not real high, but when we went over the waterfall, the raft was sideways. And my back was to the water. And I fell into that river, and I went under. And I came that close to drowning. And it was my fault. I made a big mistake. I was told to do something, and I didn't listen to it. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to tell you that story, okay, and how it happened and why it happened. And I want you to be listening for that story, okay, to hear why I almost drowned and how it will help you in your relationship with the Lord, okay? Or you can have a seat. Thank you so much. In Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "Therefore, we must give more earnest heed." And that's not the way we talk today. We say, you really must pay close attention. We must give more earnestly, must pay attention to the things we have heard, lest we drift away. And I'm going to preach on that text tonight, boys and girls and students and moms and dads, and I want you to do something right now. I want you to ask God, say, God, tonight, don't say it out loud, but in your heart, say, God, tonight, speak to my heart personally. Would you do that? God, tonight, speak to my heart personally. We need to pay close attention to the things we've heard, lest we begin to drift. When you study God's Word and you begin with the word therefore, you can really never start there. If you're studying the Bible and you ever see a verse that says therefore, you always ask, what is it there for? You've got to understand what chapter 1 is about. Chapter 1 is a chapter about the deity of Christ, about the fact that Jesus is the Son of God. Just like in John chapter 1 and Colossians chapter 1, we see that Jesus is the Son of God. And the writer of Hebrews continually uses words like Jesus is better than, and Jesus is greater than, and Jesus is more excellent than. And I'll see if I can describe to you why he does that. I want you to imagine that you've gone to the beach, okay? And you're on the beach and you're out there swimming in the ocean. And you're having a good time. But as you're swimming, you realize that the current is taking you out to sea. And so you begin to swim and you realize you're getting tired and you're not going to make it. So you begin to yell out for somebody to come and get you and rescue you. And fortunately for you, you see a boat coming towards you and somebody's rowing. And you're going under and you're gasping for breath. And then you notice on the side of the boat it says lifeguard. So now you know you're in good shape. And the boat gets closer and the lifeguard stands up in the boat. And he reaches down and you know what he's going to do. He's going to grab a life preserver and he's going to throw it out to you and you can be rescued. But as he reaches down, instead of grabbing a life preserver, he holds up a picture. And it's a picture of another lifeguard. And he begins to yell at you. And he says, look, this is a lifeguard. This lifeguard has saved hundreds of people. This lifeguard can save your life. Now, boys and girls and students, I don't know about you. If I'm drowning, I do not want a picture of a lifeguard. What I want is a what? Lifeguard. Well, the Hebrews, they had in their history Moses, King David, the temple, Abraham, all these things. And this writer is trying to say to them, Moses was just a picture of Jesus. And Abraham was just a picture of Jesus. The temple was just a picture of Jesus. Be careful that you don't focus on the picture when you should focus on who the picture is of. In other words, not the picture of the lifeguard, but the lifeguard. Jesus is greater than these things. And it's kind of like two children, and they're having a discussion about their father. And one says to his friend, my dad's better than your dad. And so the other friend replies back, no, my daddy's better than yours. And so you might say, but my daddy's taller than your dad. Or if you reply back, my dad weighs more than your dad. Well, we reply back, well, my dad has a brand new car. The other two might say, well, my dad has 2 motorcycles. My dad can drive 100 miles an hour. My dad can drive 110. And now you bring out the big guns. My daddy can beat up your daddy. I always ask nothing. My mama can beat up my daddy. They don't mean anything to me. You understand what I'm talking about? What's going on in Hebrews is he's trying to say there's something better than Moses here. There's something better, greater, more excellent than the temple and Abraham and these things. And the Hebrew people, you've got to put your attention on Jesus. Now go back to Hebrews 2:1. He says, therefore, because of who Jesus is, we must pay close attention, or we must give more earnest heed to the things we have heard, lest we drift, or lest we begin to drift away. Boys and girls, I just got 3 points, and they're real simple, okay? Moms and dads, they're as important for you as they are for these boys and girls, these teenagers. And here they are. Number 1, boys and girls, teenagers, is this. Understand this text tells us that you have a tendency to drift. He says you got to pay attention, else you will begin to drift. You'll take your eyes off of the Savior. As a matter of fact, go and notice it says in verse 4 or verse 3, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? So we cannot neglect Jesus or we begin to drift. So let's see if we can see how this works. I'm going to do a survey. I want the students and the children and the parents and grandparents to help me out here. In your short lifetime or your long lifetime, if you think about the United States of America, I want you to raise your hand and give me your answer. Would you say that America as a country, it seems in your estimation as a child or a student or a parent or grandparent, that we're in a state of revival, and as a nation, we're moving closer and closer to God in these recent years? Or would you say, like I would, I love our country. I'm proud to be American. But I must confess, it seems like as a nation, instead of drawing closer to God, it seems to me we're moving further from God. How many would say as a nation we're moving closer to God? Raise your hand. Okay, 1 3-year-old. Okay, how many think we're moving further from God? Raise your hand. I think it's almost unanimous. Well, let's think about this. I love Georgia. I love Hall County. I love Gwinnett County. I grew up in Gwinnett County. I love where I live. Proud to be from where I'm from. But how about our community? Would you say, you know what? As I look around Hall County, as I look around Gainesville, Georgia, as I look around Winder and Buford and Kula over where I live, it seems like the last decades has been phenomenal. God is just at work in a great way, and He is. And people are responding and being saved. And people in our area, it seems like are moving closer and closer to God. Or do you say, you know what, I love where I live. I love where I am now, but the fact is, I must confess, it seems like as a community, over the recent years, over the last couple of decades for those of you older, it seems like, admittedly, we're moving further from God. How many of you say closer to God? Raise your hand. How many say further from God? Raise your hand. Almost unanimous. Well, let's think about the school that's good to boys and girls, teenagers. As you think about your school, hope you love your school, but whether you do or don't, let's think about this. Would you say that my friends, my peers, my classmates, it seems like the last 2 or 3 years, God's just been at work in a powerful way, and our school seems to be in a state of revival, and we're moving closer and closer to God? Or you say, I just have to admit it. Love my friends, love my teammates, love my classmates, love the local school, but I must admit, it seems like we're moving further from God. How many say the school where you go or where your kids or grandkids go, they're moving closer to God? Raise your hand. How many say they're moving further away from God? Raise your hand. Now, watch this. He says, you better pay close attention or you will begin to drift. Let me show you why drifting is so easy. If it is true that as a nation, we're moving further and further from God, and if it is true as a community, not as individual exceptions, but as a community, we're moving further and further from God. If it's true, our schools and our culture, further and further from God. Boys and girls, moms and dads, it's a whole lot easier to go with the flow than to go against the flow. And you got to understand, your pastor, your choir members, your Sunday school teachers, your deacons, your students, your children, me. One thing we all have in common. We all have a tendency to do what? To drift. Very good. We have a tendency to drift, which means to move further from God. Because here's why it's so prevalent. What must a person do to drift away from God? Nothing. As a matter of fact, go back to that verse in verse 3. It says, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? You see, you don't have to plant weeds in your garden to ruin it. Just neglect it. You don't have to abuse your spouse to ruin your marriage. Just neglect your spouse. It will ruin your marriage. You don't have to do anything. And that's why this is so dangerous. You have a tendency to drift. Notice the second thing. You need to understand the danger of drifting. It says, we must give more earnest heed in verse 1 to the things we have heard, lest we begin to drift away. Verse 3, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? This word escape, there's this imagery of something is entrapped, and how can you get away? So there's danger there, and there's a danger actually in drifting, and I know it from personal experience. I want to go back to my story. I was with these students, went to the Elkhorn River, and you must get in the raft with a professional guide. You cannot just get in there by yourself. People have actually lost their lives on this river, and not that it's unsafe, but you need professional guidance. And he will give you instructions on how to sit. As a matter of fact, when you sit in the raft, you sit down, and you put your foot up under the cushion of the person in front of you, and it anchors your foot because it's like they're sitting on your foot with that cushion between their bottom and your foot, but it anchors you in. And if you fall, you're supposed to fall in the raft, not fall out of the raft. The Elkhorn River is 6 miles long. It's 4.5 miles of whitewater. You must wear a helmet. You must have a professional guide, and they will show you how to work together to paddle. And when you get in that river, boys and girls and teenagers, by the time you're as far as from where I'm standing right here to that door, you're wet from head to toe. That's how quick you're into it. And so we're having just a great time. We always, I took them several times, and we would have a contest called the Biggest Center Contest. And we always said the first person thrown out of the raft, the biggest center in the group. We always had fun with that. But this year, nobody's falling out. So we got to the very end, to this waterfall. And I decided to give the students a laugh at my expense. So we go over the waterfall, and I let my foot slip out of the cushion in front of me. And I, on purpose, fell into the river. And all the students were laughing, just like I intended. And I was laughing too. And the raft started to float away. And you can see this takeout point not far away. And I'm looking at the raft facing this direction. And the water's very calm, the waterfall's behind me. And suddenly the guide stood up in the raft. That's kind of awkward to stand up in a raft. It's like standing on a waterbed. He stands up in the raft and begins to yell at me. He yelled this. I can hear what he said. What? So he yelled at me again. I can't hear him. The waterfall's making all this noise. So I didn't know what to do. And so what's happening is, I look at the sky and there's not a cloud in the sky, but I begin to hear water hitting me on the head. I think it's raining, but it's not raining. What is happening is, this waterfall behind me is coming down, and what's happening is hitting with such force, it's pulling the water backwards. I'm not floating downstream. It's so subtle, I don't realize that I'm floating back upstream towards the waterfall. And didn't even know it. And that waterfall yanked me under so fast, I did not have time to take a deep breath. I did not have time to close my eyes. I was literally several feet under the water with eyes wide open. All I could see is bubbles and fish going. That's all I could see. And I was under the water. And I began to struggle. And I tell you what began to go through my mind. What's unusual is I gave no thought to where I was going to spend eternity. And I give you a note about that. It's because that had already been decided in my life. I began to think about my family. They say your life flashes before your eyes. Some of you have faced that. I know what they mean by that. It's amazing how much I thought about in about 30 or 40 seconds. I cannot describe to you how many things went through my mind. I began to think about the students who were with me. And the person who was with them was about to drown. It's going to be a tragedy. You can imagine the pain that would be to be with somebody who's killed like that. So I'm struggling, I'm crying out, and that water circulated me back up. And I almost, the only time in my life, I just almost drowned. Now, I want to go back, boys and girls and students, and show you why I almost drowned. It goes back to the orientation when the guide said, now, put your foot under the person in front of you, leave it there. if you fall in the raft, or whatever you do, don't go out of the raft. He told us what to do if it happened, but stay in the raft. Well, I decided, I don't care what he says, I want to do what I want to do. I'm not going to pay him any attention. I want to have some fun and give the students a laugh at my expense. So I fell in the water, and the students started laughing, and I accomplished what I wanted to, I thought. And it was cool, and it was refreshing, and they were laughing. And then I almost drowned. And now I know why. That guy who was standing in the raft, remember that? And the raft is getting farther and farther from me. Remember he was screaming? Today, I know what he was screaming. He was screaming, "Swim, stupid, swim! Swim, stupid, swim!" Because he knew that waterfall was behind me, and he knew, boys and girls, often, if I was just going like this, 1, 2, 3, I was out of danger. It was that simple of an explanation. But I could not hear him, and it almost cost my life.